The fun part I'm a geologist, so the fun part for me is exploring and looking for zinc, defining it, and then starting to mine it. So we're just going to give you a little bit of a overview of some of the issues associated with how we explore for zinc. The nature of zinc mineralisation makes it quite interesting for us because whilst the majority of our zinc deposits exploited around the world are formed from sphalerite, sphalerite generally occurs with other metals and other minerals. And so often if you find zinc, you also will get lead, silver, maybe some gold, maybe some copper, maybe some cobalt and some other things, nickel as well. So therefore, depending on the abundance of the economic minerals of interest, sometimes zinc is the prime target for you, and other times it's really only a byproduct, a secondary byproduct. So it really makes things interesting. You might start out looking for zinc and you'll end up finding a lead-silver ore body because sometimes they're found in similar locations. That really impacts on some of the aspects of how you might explore for it. But because also sphalerite in nature can be very, very, very fine grained, and sometimes it can be very, very coarse grained, and the pictures that we showed earlier on the presentation show nice, big, coarse crystals of sphalerite. But often sphalerite is very, very fine grained, and this leads us to have quite significant difficulties when it comes to processing. Doesn't really bother us when it comes to the exploration for it, but it certainly impacts processing. So just to give you some examples of some zinc deposits. Here's one of the biggest zinc deposits in the world in India, and that's the typical grades that you'll see at that particular deposit, 12.8% zinc, and you can see there that it comes along with significant amounts of lead and silver, but clearly zinc is the prime target in this deposit. Century deposit in Australia is very similar. You can see slightly lower zinc grades, slightly higher lead grades, and pretty similar silver grades. Very occasionally you get really lucky and you get somewhere like Rosebery in Tasmania where you have zinc, copper, lead, silver and gold. And they're all combined, and if you can recover all of those, you can do exceedingly well in terms of the dollar value per tonne of material because you've got a good amount of zinc, but you've also got copper, lead, silver and gold to earn you revenue. On the other side of things, when zinc is more of a byproduct, you can see here at Antamina, there is still a reasonable amount of zinc, but it's only 0.7. Now, we're much lower levels of zinc. The prime focus here is the copper, 0.9% copper. There's also silver and a little bit of molybdenum coming in. And at the other extreme, you have a deposit in Finland, which is 0.5% zinc, 0.2% nickel, copper, cobalt, and a little bit of uranium. So zinc can occur in a lot of different ways in the natural environment. So typically, if you were thinking about that, how much zinc might be in a deposit, you can see here that these are diagrams which show you the typical amount of a grain that you'd have in a sample. So you can see on the left-hand side 1% going all the way up to 25%. So the right-hand side there, you've got 25% of the interesting thing in that particular rock sample. But the amount of zinc in that sample, if that was all sphalerite, there's only 65% at best zinc in sphalerite. So if you have 25% of sphalerite in your rock, you really only have 16% zinc because the other material is iron and sulfur. So that influences. When we look at some of the previous slide, you're down around having 1 or 2% zinc in some of the deposits where they're byproducts. If it's a pure zinc deposit with minor lead and zinc, you're up at the right-hand side. So that makes it much easier for exploring because when you see 10% or 15% of a mineral in a rock, it's something that it's very visible and it's very easy to see. So the typical exploration process, if any of you have been in the previous seminars, this is exactly the same. Generally speaking, when you're looking for a mineral deposit, any type of mineral deposit it could be, there's a general exploration process that you go through, all the way from developing an idea about why or where a mineral deposit might be, and then you map through a very scientific, trying to be scientific process where you look for where that deposit might be, and then you try to use techniques to actually define it and test it and then delineate it and turn it into a resource and reserve and eventually start to mine. So those are the key processes. when we think about zinc in particular, geologists spend many hours of their days, particularly some of them, thinking about how deposits form. And so primarily for zinc, there are generally regarded to be four key methods that zinc forms. There are the volcanic hosted massive sulphide deposits, you have limestone or carbonate hosted deposits, sediment hosted deposits, and then you have intrusive related geological deposits. And so each of those has different styles and it has different characteristics that you need to understand when you're exploring for them. This is an example of a model for a volcanic massive hosted massive sulphide deposit. And as you see, geologists love colour, geologists love drawing pictures and to try to represent what they think is happening under the Earth's surface. So this is an example where we have a heat source coming from the bottom, from potentially 5 to 10 kilometres below the Earth's surface, and it sets up a convection cell. And at the end of the day, we end up with some massive sulphides on the seafloor surface or on the land surface. So it's a process that geologists think has happened in the past to form zinc deposits and other massive sulphide deposits. The really nice thing about this particular deposit is that we know this is happening right now. Off the coast of Papua New Guinea and other places, particularly in the Pacific Ocean, we are getting volcanic deposits happening right now that are being explored by companies that intend, hopefully, at some stage to exploit this. This is a chimney of massive sulphides that's forming right now on the seafloor, and is being discovered and being explored for by various companies who are going down here with submersibles and drilling and sampling. So we know that this process is real because we can see it today. Another type of model is a sedimentary hosted deposit, and you can see here that there's several different models, but they're related to some sort of structure, and they're related to fluids moving along sediments and depositing in particularly receptive horizons within the rocks. And you can see there's mentions of different types of models there: Mississippi Valley, Irish hosted, various other things. So that's helping geologists try to understand where they might find zinc and where to go looking for it once they actually understand their models. So where do we go looking? Well, we try to find areas where previous ore bodies have been found. They're always a good start. Different settings are favourable for the different deposits. So that target generation is a really important part of the first start of exploration. Is that you have an understanding of how the deposits form, and then what you want to do is go and say, well, where could a new deposit be that no one's found yet? It helps very much when you go exploring if you've got working in a country that has really good basic geological information. Australia is a good example of that. USA, parts of South America are very good examples where almost for free you can get from the government a whole range of important information that helps you do this target generation. Some of the countries where there's very limited geological information available still, it makes it a little bit more difficult because you've got to go and collect it, whereas this is generally free information or very, very low cost information that gets a lot of information for you in terms of background. You often then will have to then start doing your own test work, and regional scale exploration often involves things like geophysical testings, whether it's measuring the gravity responses or the magnetic susceptibility. There's a whole range of different parameters that can be measured through geophysics that may give you some clue as to the potential to find some form of mineral deposit, and today's focus is clearly on zinc. Then you actually end up having to get onto the ground and do things, and so a lot of companies will be doing stream sediment sampling and soil geochemistry, where they're taking lots of samples and they're trying to find out whether there are any elevated levels of zinc in this instance that give them an indication that somewhere in the catchments of those streams there might be something worth interesting that they need to follow up on. After that, you want to work your way through, and hopefully in countries where there's lots of outcrop, then you can actually do rock chip geochemistry, which further then refines whether or not you've got something of interest. Often then, once you start to narrow down, you can actually really start to focus your geophysics in a particular area. Instead of concentrating on tens of thousands of kilometres, now you might be down to tens of kilometres to say, we really want to understand this area very carefully. And you might do a whole range of different techniques, geophysical techniques, to do that. And there's a diagram showing the results from a geophysical survey. The reds in that particular diagram are something that's anomalous or elevated. We don't necessarily know what it is, but we'll have to test it because it looks interesting. Ultimately, you'll have to drill. Generally speaking, when it comes to most mineral deposits around the world, you have to drill holes because the deposit sits somewhere below the surface. So drilling is really how you do that. And for zinc, there is no real alternative. It can be expensive, and depending on where you are in the world, it could cost you up to $500 US to drill 1 metre. So if you're drilling 300 metre holes or 1,000 metre holes, it can get very expensive. But at the end of the day, this is what you're looking for. So the exploration program is really just working your way through from grassroots exploration and testing, refining, until hopefully you've isolated a mineral deposit that is worth doing some more work on and following up. As part of your assessment of any mineral deposit, zinc included, you need to go through a process of estimating the mineral resources, assessing the feasibility, both technical, financial, and then hopefully if everything is successful, you'll produce an ore reserve which can then be the justification for a financial investment to build the mine. And so this particular diagram shows that transition as you go from exploration through mineral resources and then looking at all of these factors to convert them into ore reserves, which then become the framework for making an investment decision.
And you showed us in some of your slides that zinc is not even a metal in and of itself. It's part of the sphalerite or various other formations. Is it better, therefore, to go for a mine that mines, let's say, lead, which I think was also on your chart, or another metal of which zinc is a byproduct, or better to go for a primarily zinc mine where copper and other metals are a byproduct?
The best alternative is to get a mine that you've got multiple metals that are paying your bills. So if you can get copper, iron, lead, zinc, silver, gold, whatever, all together, then you're revenue-wise, you're better off. The disadvantage to that is that your processing route will be much more complicated because you've got to separate them out to make money from them. So it's a balance. Some of the deposits where substantial zinc is being mined in the world, zinc is really only a byproduct, and they just get credits for the zinc, but their prime influence or their prime metal might be copper. It's you might start looking for a zinc deposit, and then you might end up finding a copper deposit with some zinc credits. You're not going to walk away from that deposit. You're still going to do something.